opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineering Watch Radio for the week of September 3rd, 2016. This show is broadcast on KQMS throughout Northern California on 1400 AM and 99.3 FM, Saturday mornings from 6 to 7. Recordings of the show are posted on KQMS and geoengineeringwatch.org. Another week of planet Earth in siege. This is not in jest or a metaphor. The planet and populations around the globe are increasingly under siege with a power structure that's completely out of control and a population that refuses to wake up. A quote from Marcus Aurelius from nearly 2,000 years ago, Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius. Hard to argue with this truth, isn't it? He said, "If an individual objects to truths that are all too evident, it is no easy task finding arguments that will change their mind." How true that is. How many things are so blatantly obvious and people refuse to see because it simply doesn't fit into their belief system. And thus the human race continues to plunge towards certain near-term total extinction if we stay on this course. When will people wake up? The great unraveling of the biosphere and thus society continues to accelerate. And as I stated, the populations still remain in slumber and near total denial. Man's arrogance is epitomized in the form of his attempt to play God with Earth's life support systems by engineering the climate, or attempting to. But know this, the agenda being carried out in our skies and on the ground is far more dire than almost anyone yet comprehends. What's going on in our skies is not just about climate engineering. It's about weaponizing the atmosphere. And this is backed up with military documents and historical precedent and report. Time to learn what's happening, because if we don't expose it, if we don't stop it, the planet won't support life much longer. That's a mathematical fact. Military-industrial complex is utterly, totally, and completely out of control. A quick weather update, and then on to more news than we'll be able to cover in this issue, I'm sure. Record high global temperatures, deluges, and droughts continue to accelerate around the globe as the planet descends into total meltdown, with climate engineering helping to fuel the overall fire. Important to remember that if you're an environmentalist or you belong to an environmental group or a group that tries to address climate change, if you're not talking about climate engineering first and foremost, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. This is not to say that there's not countless anthropogenic causes of damage to the planet, and anyone who denies that is living in a delusion as well. We've cut down the forests, we're paving the planet, poisoning the oceans. I could go on and on for days on how badly we're decimating Earth's overall web of life. But climate engineering is the epitome of that, and again, any environmentalist group that doesn't address climate engineering, which is nearly every environmentalist group, you're missing the point as well. You have your head in the sand. Time to pull it out. Floods in Colorado Springs this last week that were unprecedented. We have 1,000-year floods happening again and again and again. Once in 1,000-year floods happening around the globe. Now becoming the norm. Climate engineering continues to disrupt the system. Doesn't mean it's the only causal factor. The planet's much warmer. There's much more water vapor in the atmosphere. If climate engineering was stopped tomorrow, we would have incredibly radical weather. But at least it would be allowed. The planet would be allowed at that point to try to find its own equilibrium based on the damage that's been done, and would not be hindered by the utter insanity of climate engineering. Hurricane Hermine, barely a hurricane. In fact, we have to rely on official sources to know that it even was a hurricane, because it was radically suppressed, as have been hurricanes for over 11 years. And I think that was starting to become very obvious, so they had to let a hurricane spin up in the Gulf of Mexico, because Florida hasn't had a landfall hurricane for 11 years, in spite of record warm oceans, record warm temperatures, and the rest of the world being slaughtered with hurricanes. Why weren't they happening here? Because they were being suppressed. And the hurricane spun up right off the shore of Florida, didn't spin in the Gulf long at all, so it didn't have time to churn up all the oil sitting at the floor of the Gulf of Mexico from the Macondo spill and countless other spills, where Corexit is sprayed on that material to sink it corrects it, a chemical banned throughout the globe, but the oil industry is allowed to use it here because the oil industry seems to control our political system. So we have a hurricane that didn't do much damage, but now they can say the hurricane drought is over, so it doesn't start to look suspect that hurricanes are being suppressed. And by the way, there are patents for hurricane suppression. After the very brutal year of 05-06, there was stated on the record, even by Discovery Channel at that point, that the U.S. was going to reinstitute its hurricane suppression program. Those who don't think this kind of weather modification is going on are living in an alternate reality. Why would you think that there's hundreds of publicized weather modification programs going on around the country and around the globe, but yet our government would never do this without asking our permission, would they? Anybody who thinks that, again, you're living in an alternate reality. Quick update and diatribe relating to the media and the part they continue to play as accessories to the crime on countless fronts. Media is an accessory when they lie about, hide, or omit the truth. They are accessories to the crime. And we have an example right here in Northern California that's a very stellar example of media criminal censorship. So a very short update on the Record Searchlight's Total Disinformation so-called science study publication put out by Carnegie Science and a former defense industry contractor, Ken Caldera. A reminder of the facts. The Searchlight headline, quote, "Chemtrails are a silly conspiracy theory," was a quote from a former video game technician that runs a Don't Dare Dispute Anything with the Government disinformation website. The quote did not come from a scientist, as the completely dishonest Record Searchlight would have you believe. So about that headline, 2 points. The chemtrails term is simply a layman's term for climate engineering, otherwise known as geoengineering or solar radiation management. So here's the rub on the latest Record Searchlight Total Disinformation hit piece. Here's a direct quote from the very source of the Searchlight article cited as saying chemtrails are not real. The source is Carnegie Science. And here's a direct headline quote again from Carnegie Science Studies, done in 2012. Ready? Listen to this quote. "Geoengineering, a Whiter Sky." That's the title of a study from the very institution the Searchlight quoted as saying, quote, chemtrails aren't real, which they're not, because chemtrails is not a science term. It doesn't have any science basis at all. And the Searchlight insists on using it, as do other media sources, because they don't want you to find facts. And too many people, unfortunately, don't want to find facts. So I guess it's a good marriage when we have a media that lies and a public that doesn't want to know the truth. Now, listen closely, because I'm about to read a single phrase from the report from Carnegie Science, which is the source the Searchlight used for their article to say chemtrails aren't real. And here's the quote from the Carnegie Science study that the Searchlight didn't talk about geoengineering. From Washington, D.C., from the report from Carnegie Science, one idea for fighting global warming is to increase the amount of aerosols, those are particulates sprayed into the sky, in the atmosphere, scattering incoming solar energy away from Earth's surface. Solar geoengineering would have a side effect of whitening the sky during the day. And does anybody in these studies ever mention, oh, by the way, all these toxic materials that we're going to spray into the sky are going to rain down on you where you will inhale them? No, nobody mentions that. So everybody just wonders why they have allergies, asthma, all kinds of respiratory issues, and they can't seem to figure it out because air quality won't report on it, because these particles are much smaller than anything they test for. So all of this toxic pollution that clouds our skies, makes them hazy, silvery white, hazy on the ground, all of this pollution goes completely under the radar. If you think not knowing about it is going to save you, think again. And who else participated in the Carnegie Science study? Again, Ken Caldera, the very geoengineer that was responsible for the Record Searchlight's public in the dark information article that was nothing more than a don't worry, everything's fine, go back to sleep. Anyone that says something is wrong is just a conspiracy theorist. So to be clear, the very same source the Searchlight cites as proof geoengineering is not happening, Carnegie Science, has done studies on geoengineering describing exactly what we see occurring in our skies. And by the way, again, as another reminder, the Searchlight didn't cover the other side of the story at all. Their total disinformation spin covered none of the facts. They completely refused to even examine the actual facts, let alone print them. And anyone that wishes to examine a full expose of the Searchlight's completely tyrannical behavior can go to the recent section at geoengineeringwatch.org, open the post titled, quote, "Rapidly Increasing Awareness of the Climate Engineering Crimes is Panicking Corporate Media." In this expose, you can read the arrogant emails from Searchlight editor Silas Lyons and managing editor Carol Ferguson. You can also read the response letters from our attorneys at the Legal Alliance to Stop Geoengineering addressing the Searchlight. And what was Carol Ferguson's primary concern regarding the articles that the Searchlight journalistic tyranny and bankruptcy put out? It seemed Carol was unhappy about her hairstyle in the article's photo. Isn't that profound, that that's the degree of the managing editor of the Searchlight's concern? Not that they're putting out completely false information, factless information to confuse and deceive the public. No, she's worried about her hair. And you can see in the comment section of that article exactly what she stated. Take a look. Ever wonder how KRCR chief meteorologist Mike Kruger, and these two media examples are examples of what's happening around the country, so it matters. It matters to drive this point home, to expose exactly how the media behaves, exactly how they're hiding the truth from the population. So for those in Northern California, if you wonder how Mike Kruger sometimes, somehow knows days in advance that it will be, quote, mostly sunny, which almost always means a sky filled with lingering, expanding aircraft particulate trails that turn the sky into a murky, milky, cobweb-like, industrial-looking mess that often blots out the entire sky. Does anyone even wonder at the mostly sunny, quote, forecasts? Kruger and all the other meteorologists just like him are willing to read a script so long as they get their paycheck and pensions. And who's providing the script? Very important question. The National Weather Service and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they're the ones that provide what the meteorologist reads primarily. And exactly who's doing the weather modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA? Private defense contractor Raytheon, who's one of the largest entities involved with the climate engineering insanity. Yes, that's right, Raytheon, private defense contractor doing the weather modeling for National Weather Service and NOAA. And finally, why wouldn't anyone at the National Weather Service and NOAA speak out about this? First, government scientists have no First Amendment protection, as I've said over and over. And next, more importantly, there's an illegal federal gag order on all National Weather Service and all NOAA employees. Another glaring fact that the Searchlight and KRCR have been given repeatedly but have refused to report on. So there you are. That's what we have from our media in Northern California and around the rest of the country. The Record Searchlight and KRCR. If you think you're going to get the truth from either one of these entities, think again. And a final point on all this before I get to headlines. Those in the media that assist the power structure to lie, spin, omit the truth completely should be, must be, considered every bit as much a criminal as those who are actually responsible for the ongoing epidemic of government and corporate criminality. We must consider them in the same category because they're hiding the truth from the population. How bad is it? Here's some mainstream media headlines that actually do admit to atmospheric spraying. We're told in this case it's for killing mosquitoes, but it's no less lethal to all life, including us. Consider this, Washington Post. It's like it's been nuked. Millions of bees dead after South Carolina sprays for Zika mosquitoes. That's a headline from the Washington Post. Here's an excerpt from that report. The pattern matched acute pesticide poisoning by one estimate at a single apiary, a bee farm, Flowerton Bee Farm and Supply in Somerville. 46 hives died on the spot, totaling about 2.5 million bees dead from the mosquito spraying. Another headline, and I want to get to just how lethal this mosquito spraying is, not just for insects, but for us. And how hard should that be to figure out? If it kills a bug, can it really be harmless to us? Why do people believe such absurdities? Singapore's surge in Zika cases amplifies economic fears happening in Singapore. I'm sure they'll be sprayed if they're not being sprayed already. I think they are. Now, let's look at exactly what they're spraying. It's called organophosphate. This is in the stated attempt to kill mosquitoes. How lethal is this material for us? It's incredibly lethal. And think about that your government and your authorities are spraying this on you. And if you think that they're not spraying above your heads with climate modification, you haven't looked at the facts. So here's a report from the Norwegian Drug Control and Drug Discovery Institute, the NDC-DDI, from Norway about organophosphate, which is what they're spraying for Zika virus for the mosquitoes right now. This is an excerpt from the report. Quote, even short-term sublethal exposure to organophosphates has long-lasting damaging effects on the nervous system. Another point, the denial by medical insurance, judicial and governing authorities of the impairment of cognition, of our thinking ability, and damage to the central nervous system in humans after short-term exposure to a sublethal concentration of organophosphate is groundless and even criminal. The denial, again to reiterate that, the denial by all recognized authorities that this is so lethal is, the report calls, groundless and criminal. Another point from the report, from the science report on organophosphate, which is what's being sprayed for the Zika issue. A moratorium on or even prohibition of the use of organophosphates as insecticides and pesticides must be accepted globally. The use of toxic chemicals by administrative authorities such as police, because some crowd control measure substances contain organophosphates, by police against civilian populations should be stopped and regulated by the Geneva Protocol. The use of gases against humans in civilian life is not acceptable, when at the same time the use of gases on the battlefield against military personnel is prohibited. So even what's prohibited in wartime for biological warfare is being allowed under certain circumstances with certain chemicals sprayed for crowd control that also contain organophosphates. And they're using organophosphates right now to spray populations in the U.S. for Zika and other countries as well. Unimaginably toxic substances, killing everything, not just the mosquitoes or the bees, but having permanent effects on human health. What's it take to wake the population up? Truly, what's it take? What's it take, back to a quick mention of the vaccination issue again, which is an issue that must be brought to light. What reasonable person would allow the injection of thimerosal into their children's veins? How is it possible that we are allowing this to be done to our kids? Highly toxic substance, thimerosal, an additive in vaccinations, aside from the other negative effects of vaccinations. And for those people who are so unimaginably conditioned, that have bought into the mainstream media criminal lie that their children who were vaccinated are not safe because some other child was not vaccinated, if the vaccinations are so effective and your child is vaccinated, why would you worry about the child that's not? Can't you connect that dot? This is about making sure everyone gets vaccinated, and we have a medical system that is financially dependent on those who administer these vaccinations, and so we continue to poison our children, even though autism has escalated 20,000% since 1975, from 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 25. And the vast majority of the population, because they don't want to be separated from the herd, they don't want to be ridiculed or marginalized, they simply continue to poison their children with vaccinations. Period. If you care about your child, investigate. If you live in a mosquito-sprayed area right now, consider that you are being systematically poisoned. Period. The science is clear. 60-page science study that I just read some excerpts from about organophosphates. And if you live in those areas and are being sprayed, you're being poisoned. It's that simple. About another headline about the poisoning of the planet and the populations. This is from Down Under. The headline is this: Poison in the Heart, the nuclear wasting of South Australia. Excerpt from that report. Nuclear weapons and nuclear power are both leading instances of the irrationalities that result from a social world that has been constructed to concentrate power in the hands of a tiny minority and to make it possible for them to maintain and defend their power. This relates to where those in power choose to dump their toxic waste. And now South Australia is the recipient of so much of that toxic waste. And we still have people who pretend to be environmentally minded, people who are, in fact, in some cases, what the environmental community perceives as the epitome of an environmental personality, like James Hansen from NASA, who actually pushes nuclear power as some sort of positive. Nuclear power is suicide. It's always been suicide. There's nothing clean about nuclear energy. It creates substances that are toxic nearly forever in any time frame that matters. We're talking about substances that have a half-life, in the case of depleted uranium, of 4.5 billion years. That's as old as the planet. And yet we're building more nuclear plants with Fukushima spiraling completely out of control, no known technology to fix it, 3 full-blown meltdowns that the American population has completely forgotten about, spewing nuclear waste into the ocean, into the skies, where it's building up. It's building up and it's not going away. And we're building 60 more nuke plants. And they just pick a place like they have in Australia to dump all the nuclear waste. We're truly on the track for near-term total extinction if the human race doesn't wake up fast. Let's get to some headlines. More deceptive information that's been fed to the population that they've bought because of the media push. The clean fuel of natural gas, right? Wrong. Here's a headline. The dirty, quote, clean fuel, why natural gas outpollutes coal. And it does. How many people have bought the natural gas as environmentally friendly lie? There is no environmentally friendly fossil fuel, by the way. There is none. Just a big lie that too many people want to believe. But because of the leaks in methane throughout the entire supply chain for natural gas, it is actually mathematically worse than coal. How many people know that? Look it up. Don't believe me. I don't want anybody to believe me, and I never ask anybody to believe me or anything I say, and I never will. But I ask you to investigate if you care, if you give a damn about your children at all, or yourself, because this is not off on the horizon. The problems we face are not somewhere over the next ridge. They're kicking the front door in right now. Another headline. Global supply chains paralyzed after world's 7th largest container ship files bankruptcy. Assets are frozen. If the economy was so wonderful, why would we have one of the largest shippers in the world going bankrupt? Because as I've said in so many previous shows, it's not happening. It's not shipping. The Baltic Dry Index, the most untarnished indicator of economic activity in the world, is in the basement. It's all a facade. The record stock market numbers, total facade, totally orchestrated, printed, fed, fiat money, assets from thin air, facade. The only thing that matters is the environment. No environment, no civilization, no life on Earth, nothing. Nature has produced 75% of all global GDP for free, historically, no more. You can't hide what's unfolding much longer because ecosystems around the globe are collapsing. So, what happens to the economic system when the ecosystems collapse? Here's another headline. Banks are preparing for, quote, an economic nuclear winter. And even that headline is deceptively conservative because it still somehow implies that this will pass. It's not going to pass. The paradigm we've known is over. The sooner we face that and attempt to salvage what's left, the more we may have left to salvage. Another headline, fear spreads of a housing crash in Canada. Again, more artificially inflated bubbles that are going to crash. Can't not happen. It will happen. It is happening. Another headline, didn't see this on our local media, don't think. Walmart to cut 7,000 back office store jobs. That's how wonderful the economy is. So ask yourself, how could the stock market be at record highs with shipping companies crashing, going bankrupt, massive job cuts at the largest retailer on the planet? It's all a facade, and the smoke and mirror show won't last much longer. Another headline, negative rates. Central bankers worldwide embrace race to the bottom. This is about helicopter money, the sort of printing and distributing of artificial wealth that is the sign of the last death throes of what has been, of trying to keep a system alive that was doomed from the beginning, the Perpetual growth on a finite planet with finite resources that had to crash and is crashing. And to back that up, here's another headline. This is how desperate they become in Finland. Thousands to receive basic income in Finland, a trial that could lead to the greatest societal transformation of our time. What does that headline mean? It means the Finnish government is going to pay people for nothing so that they can continue to live and consume. If that's not a snake eating its own tail, I don't know what is. And that's basically what we have happening here in the U.S. The artificial propping up of the stock market so that people can feel safe and secure that their retirement account is growing from nothing, and that somehow they'll live happily ever after, and they can ignore everything that's going on in the world. Not reality. That reality is crashing right now. Another headline. Norway raids sovereign wealth fund to cover government expenses. Another example of a snake eating its own tail, period. That's what we have going on. Another headline. Central banks, welfare for the wealthy. Yes. For those that don't understand the monetary system yet, we have private bankers that run the world. Nothing federal about the Federal Reserve. It's private bankers. But people are deceived by the title. They think there's something to back up the money printing that's going on, and there's not. There's nothing to back it up. They simply print it out of thin air. Central banks run countries, they run militaries, thus they run the world. When people ask me who's behind the spraying, and they ask me all the time, who's behind the geoengineering that's going on in our skies? The covert weather warfare, because that's exactly what it is. All roads lead back to the central bankers. Those who control the purse strings control everything else. That's the system we live under. Another headline, Germans lose faith in banks and rush to buy safes. Population, at least in Germany, is starting to wake up, aren't they? We need the population in the United States to wake up fast. So on that note, what else is our government doing when we're being told how much we should fear the terrorist organizations around the group? Remember when Al-Qaeda was the buzz fear word for terrorism? How about this headline? U.S. government says it's no longer against Al-Qaeda. Excerpt from that report. A quote from our government official. We're not focused on the former al-Nusra Front, which is Al-Qaeda in Syria. We're focused on Daesh, ISIS. And that's what we're fighting, and that's where, therefore, we look and where we target. In other words, we're not fighting Al-Qaeda anymore. So, in regard to ISIS, now let's go back to Al-Qaeda. How did Al-Qaeda start? What about Osama bin Laden? Who helped Osama bin Laden in the beginning? Our government. It's a historical fact. Look it up. Then he was used as the scapegoat for 9/11 because we're told, the official narrative, that a diabetic Arab stuck somewhere in a cave in the mountains somehow pulled off this terrorist attack against the most sophisticated military on the planet, that somehow his completely untrained pilots managed to fly around over the most protected airspace on the planet near the Pentagon for an hour and a half without any of our fighter jets ever being able to find them or shoot them down. We're told Building 7, the third building, which so many people don't even know about, and they refuse to even look. They don't know there was a third building that collapsed on 9/11 that never got hit by anything. We're told some furniture burning on the first floor caused that to collapse. If you believe these things, if you believe the official narrative on these incidences, you're in a very, very dark corner. And that dark corner is not going to save you from what's coming. Only a population that wakes up soon, a military that wakes up to what they're being used for. And that's what's most important, to wake up our military. But it depends on us, the population, to circulate data to help wake up our military brothers and sisters that they're being used for mercenaries for those in power, period. We need our military brothers and sisters awake and on the side of the population, which is why they join the military, I think, isn't it? I believe that. I think we have great motives for our military brothers and sisters, but a great motive doesn't matter if your head's in the sand and you're being ordered to do something that's completely counter to that motive. And that's exactly what's happening. On that note, what else is our country up to? Another headline, U.S. Special Ops training in Latin America tripled, documents reveal. What are special ops training? Why are our troops training in Latin America? And why do we have institutions here in the U.S. like the School of the Americas? Encourage anyone to look that up. School of the Americas was an institution here in the States that trained the death squads that wreaked havoc in Central America to protect, quote, U.S. interests. So anytime unions tried to organize, those leaders were slaughtered. And who helped to run that? Who helped to orchestrate all that? None other than John Bolton, who's frequently on Fox News. He looks like a walrus with a mustache. And that's who Fox News uses for commentary, someone who participated in supervising the death squads in Central America. Look up everything I'm saying. It's historical fact. And now our special ops troops are training there too. And it's not about freedom. It's not about democracy. It's not about the drug war. It's about controlling other countries and toppling anyone who doesn't go along with U.S. policy. And again, I want to state this clearly. This doesn't mean that China or Russia, other major powers, are in any sense benevolent. They are not benevolent. But they are not the main provocateur with what's about to befall us, which is World War III. And that's what our power structure is preparing for, because they know they can't hide what's unfolding much longer. On that note, another headline. This is from Professor Michael Chossudovsky from Global Research. Here's the headline. The Strategies of Global Warfare, War with China and Russia, Washington's Military Design in the Asia Pacific. From this report, it is important to focus on Southeast Asia and East Asia in a broader geopolitical context. North Korea as well as Russia are potential targets under Obama's, quote, pivot to Asia, involving the combined threat of missile deployments, naval power, and preemptive nuclear war. Want to stress again, our power structure is running out of options because the biosphere implosion is so total. The walls are closing in from so many sides, and the depth of deception is so total that once the links in the chain start dropping out, our reality is going to turn upside down overnight. Those in power know this. They know they can't hide what's unfolding much longer, and they know when the population wakes up to the fact that not only is the Zika mosquito spray completely toxic to all life, including us, that the population is beginning to wake up to the climate engineering insanity, also completely toxic, that is irreparably contaminated everything on our planet, torn apart Earth's protective atmospheric layers like the ozone layer. This was nothing more than weather warfare because the elements are toxic. It's biological warfare. Populations are beginning to wake up to all of this, and once they wake up, once they panic, they're going to be looking for who is responsible for all this, and those in power know it. So they're maneuvering for war right now. And back to our military brothers and sisters, if you simply, blindly, unquestioningly follow any order you're given, are you not a part of the problem? That's a simple question. If you blindly follow any order you're given, are you not a part of the problem? Are you not just as tyrannical as those giving the orders if you choose to blindly follow them? All I'm asking, and I believe again that many of our military brothers and sisters, the majority, have signed up for honorable motives, but a motive is not enough. It's not enough. If you continue to blindly follow orders that not only threaten the entire planet, but obviously then your own citizens and indeed your own families, then you're participating in these crimes of ecocide, genocide, and omnicide. You're a part of those crimes if you blindly follow such orders. I'm begging you to wake up. Continuing from this report from Mr. Chossudovsky from Global Research, we're not dealing with piecemeal military endeavors. The regional Asia-Pacific military agenda under the auspices of the U.S. Pacific Command is part of a global process of U.S.-NATO military planning. U.S. military actions are carefully coordinated. Major military and covert intelligence operations are being undertaken simultaneously in the Middle East, Eastern Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Asia, the Asia-Pacific region. Also, in turn, the planning of military operations is coordinated with non-conventional forms of warfare, including regime change, financial warfare, and economic sanctions. The current situation is all the more critical inasmuch as U.S.-NATO war on Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran is part of the U.S. presidential election debate. War is presented as a political and military option to Western public opinion. Continuing from the report, the U.S.-NATO military agenda combines both major theater operations as well as covert actions geared toward destabilizing sovereign nations. What I covered earlier, America's hegemonic project is to destabilize and destroy countries through acts of war, support of terrorist organizations, regime change, and economic warfare. Covered all that earlier. While a World War III scenario has been on the drawing board of the Pentagon for more than 10 years, military action against Russia and China is now contemplated at a, quote, operational level. U.S. and NATO forces have been deployed in essentially 3 major regions in the world: the Middle East and North Africa theater wars, and U.S. NATO-sponsored insurgencies directed against Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, under the banner of the, quote, global war on terrorism. Again, with organizations that U.S. policies have helped to spawn, fuel, and fund. And then they're used as a premise in order to launch wars in countries of our military's choosing. 2, Eastern Europe, including Poland and Ukraine, with military maneuvers, war games, and the deployment of military hardware at Russia's doorstep, which could potentially lead to confrontation with the Russian Federation. Covered this in previous shows again and again and again. What would Americans do if Russia and China were engaging in war games in Tijuana, or perhaps across the border in Canada? What would we do? Or in Cuba? What happened when Russia tried to do anything in Cuba? We almost hit nuclear war then, didn't we? And yet, Americans seem to think that if we do this on their border, on Russia's border, that they should accept that. Because we're America, after all. We can do anything we want. We can have our bases in 156 countries around the globe. If that's not empire, what is? What is? Is that what Americans want? Is empire? In fact, I know some Americans, and I'm sad to say people who I used to know and care about will no longer communicate with, that when it came right down to it, they didn't really care what had to happen as long as their own personal party could continue. As long as they could continue driving a big SUV and getting a paycheck and a pension from a very dubious source, they didn't really care what had to happen. I don't have any use for that kind of people, and I don't want that kind of, quote, friends in my world. Don't want them. I don't care who it is. I'm sorry to say that there's a lot of people in our population that fit that category. From the Chasodowski report, item number 3, the U.S. and its allies are also threatening China under President Obama's, quote, pivot to Asia. Item number 4, Russia is also confronted on its northeastern frontier through the deployment of NORAD and NORTHCOM. Item number 5, in other regions of the world, including Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa, U.S. intervention is geared towards regime change and economic warfare directed against a number of non-compliant countries: Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Ecuador, Bolivia, Cuba, Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua. In sub-Saharan Africa, the pretext that has largely been used to occupy as many countries as possible is the pretext of the Islamic war on Islamic terrorism. And this is what's been used for the U.S. and AFRICOM to put boots on the ground in so many countries in Africa. And let's remember, in Africa, as I've covered also in previous shows, weather warfare has also been used. These countries have been droughted out completely with NATO weather modification programs, brought to their knees, and then the U.S. is allowed to occupy those countries. This is truly the weapon of choice, weather warfare. It's happened in the Middle East as well, as I've also brought up in previous shows. Every single Middle Eastern country that has been destabilized and toppled was subjected to once-in-a-thousand-year droughts before that happened. Do we all think that's just a coincidence? Really? We have the leaders of those countries, like Iran, who have air forces and militaries who know what's going on in their airspace or upstream from their airspace, stating on the record that their countries were being droughted out by NATO weather modification programs. If you don't believe me, please investigate. That's all I ask. And by the way, for the record, the same aerosol operations that have droughted out countries in sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East are also droughting out parts of the U.S., especially in California. This is weather warfare, period. This is being inflicted by our own government, and governments around the globe are also engaged. China and Russia also engaged. Every country covering themselves, they're all engaged in these programs for different reasons. There's a multitude of agendas being carried out. Now, where do we go from here about the election? Why would anyone participate in such a total facade? Two insanely bad choices for different reasons, but does that even matter? Perhaps a Clinton presidency could be compared to a shot in the head, while the Trump presidency could be compared to a shot in the gut. But in the end, why do Americans choose to even participate in such a completely orchestrated theater of the absurd? It's time to cease participation in a system that is criminally corrupt beyond comprehension or repair. It's far past time for our military brothers and sisters again to examine and face what they're being used for. Paid mercenaries for the power structure, mercenaries that are sent to foreign lands under the pretext of fighting terrorism that was spawned, fueled, and funded by the very same criminal power structure that also has so far controlled the U.S. military. Does anyone remember Brzezinski's grand chessboard, which I covered in previous shows, of taking over Eurasia? Remember John McCain helping to rally the protesters that toppled the democratically elected government in Ukraine? And how about McCain's photo standing with ISIS leaders? How about Joe Biden's son instantly ending up on the governing board for Ukraine's oil resources? Don't remember that one? You should. What about the coincidence of every toppled nation, as I just mentioned, in the Middle East being subjected to a once-in-a-thousand-year drought, which of course destabilized their societies, as I mentioned, just prior to being toppled? Is that just coincidence also? If you don't think that the U.S. NATO geoengineering weather warfare programs had anything to do with any of this, you're living in an alternate reality. I want to get to a very important and on-target rant from one of the most profound authors in the history of the human race, Samuel Clemens, otherwise known as Mark Twain. And for those who don't think that our country, our government, and indeed our military has engaged in some very horrific things around the planet in the name of empire, I would ask everyone to remember this. Remember what former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright said about the Iraqi sanctions? Again, some of the weapons used to topple countries that our country is using around the globe, that the Iraqi sanctions were responsible for the death of some 500,000 Iraqi children. And when Madeleine Albright was said, does she think it's worth it? Mrs. Albright said, yes, I think it's worth it. What kind of animals are running the show? Now, let's see what Mr. Twain has to say about this. I've long since greatly treasured his writings, his wisdom. Once I purchased 4 cases of a hardcover Twain book of essays titled The Damned Human Race, 400 books in total, so I could give them away to anyone that would commit to reading these pages of wisdom. And there are, of course, many other visionaries throughout the ages, but the following rant of justifiable outrage belongs to Mark Twain in consideration of all that I've covered in the show. Here's Twain's essay, Man is the Reasoning Animal, Such is the Claim. From Mr. Twain, I've been studying the traits and dispositions of lower animals, so-called, and contrasting them with the traits and dispositions of man. I find the result humiliating to me, for it obliges me to renounce my allegiance to the Darwinian theory of the ascent of man from the lower animals, since it now seems plain to me that theory ought to be vacated in favor of a new, truer one, and this new and truer one to be named the descent of man from higher animals. In proceeding toward this unpleasant conclusion, I have not guessed or speculated or conjectured, but I have used what is commonly called the scientific method. That is to say, I have subjected every postulate that presented itself to the crucial test of the actual experiment, have adopted it or rejected it according to the result. Some hunters on our Great Plains organized a buffalo hunt for the entertainment of an English earl, that to provide some fresh meat for his group, they had a charming sport. They killed 72 of those great and magnificent animals and ate part of one of them and left 71 to rot. I was aware that many men who have accumulated more millions of money than they can ever have used have shown a rabid hunger for more and have decided to cheat the ignorant and the helpless out of their poor servings in order to partially appease that appetite. I furnished 100 different kinds of wild and tame animals on the opportunity to accumulate vast stores of food, but none of them would do it. The squirrels and the bees and certain birds made accumulations, but stopped when they had gathered a winter supply and could not be persuaded to add to it, either honestly or by greed. In order to bolster up a tottering reputation, the ant pretended to store up supplies, but I was not deceived. I knew the ant. These experiments convinced me that there is a difference between man and the higher animals. He is avaricious and miserly. They are not. In the course of my experiments, I convinced myself that among the animals, man is the only one that harbors, insults, injures, broods over them, waits till he has a chance, and then takes revenge. The passion of revenge is unknown to the higher animals. The higher animals engage in individual fights, but never in organized masses. Man is the only animal that deals in that atrocity of atrocities, war. He is the only one that gathers his brethren about him and goes forth in cold blood and with calm pulse to exterminate his own kind. He's the only animal that for sordid wages will march out, as the Haitians did in our revolt, and as the boyish Prince Napoleon did in the Zulu War, and help to slaughter strangers of his own species who have done him no harm and with whom he has no quarrel. Man is the only animal that robs his helpless fellow of his country, takes his possessions of it, and drives him out of it or destroys him. Man has done this in all the ages. There's not an acre of ground on the globe that is in possession of its rightful owner, or that has not been taken away from its previous owner. Cycle after cycle, by force, the bloodshed continues. Man is the only slave, and he is the only animal who enslaves. He has always been a slave in one form or another, and has always held other slaves in bondage under him in one way or another. In our day, he is always some man's slave for wages and does that man's work, and this slave has other slaves under him for minor wages, and they do his work. The higher animals are the only ones who exclusively do their own work and provide their own living. Twain continues, man is the only patriot. He sets himself apart in his own country under his own flag and sneers at the other nations and keeps multitudes of uniformed assassins on hand at heavy expense to grab slices of other people's countries and keep them from grabbing slices of his. And in the intervals between campaigns, he washes the blood off his hands and works for the, quote, universal brotherhood of man with his mouth. Man is the religious animal. He's the only religious animal. He's the only animal that has the, quote, true religion. In fact, a great many true religions. He's the only animal that loves his neighbor as himself and cuts his throat if his theology isn't straight. He's made a graveyard of the globe in trying his honest best to smooth his brother's path to happiness in heaven. He was at it in the time of Caesars. He was at it in Muhammad's time. He was at it in the time of the Inquisition. He was at it in France a couple of centuries. He was at it in England in Mary's day. He's been at it ever since he first saw the light. He's at it today in Crete. He'll be at it somewhere else tomorrow. The higher animals have no religion, and we are told that they are going to be left out in the hereafter. I wonder why. It seems questionable to me. Man is the reasoning animal. Such is the claim. I think it's open to dispute. Indeed, my experiments have proven to me that he is the unreasoning animal. Note to history, as sketched above, it seems plain to me that whatever he is not a reasoning animal. His record is the fantastic record of a maniac. I consider that the strongest count against his intelligence is the fact that with the record behind him, he blatantly sets himself up as the head animal of the lot, whereas by his own standards, he is actually the bottom animal. In truth, man is incurably foolish. Simple things, which the other animals easily learn, he is incapable of learning. Among my other experiments was this. In an hour, I taught a cat and a dog to be friends. I put them in a cage. In another hour, I taught them to be friends with a rabbit. And in the course of 2 days, I was able to add a fox, a goose, a squirrel, and some doves. Finally, a monkey. They lived together in peace, and even affectionately. And now, in this final paragraph, Twain makes the comparison with what happens when those of the human race are combined in such an experiment as he spoke about with the animals. Twain's final paragraph. Next, in another cage, I confined an Irish Catholic from Tipperary, and as soon as he seemed tame, I added a Scottish Presbyterian from Aberdeen. Next, a Turk from Constantinople, a Greek Christian from Crete, an Armenian, a Methodist from the wilds of Arkansas, a Buddhist from China, a Brahmin from Benares, finally a Salvation Army colonel. Then I stayed away 2 whole days, and when I came back to note results, the cage of, quote, higher animals was all right. But in the other cage, the one with men, there was but a chaos of gory odds and ends of turbans and fezzes and plaids and bones and flesh. Not a specimen was left alive. The reasoning animals had disagreed on theological detail and carried the matter to a higher court. Mark Twain truly saw through the smoke and mirrors. He was an absolute visionary that was not afraid to speak out. And when he compares in this brilliant essay, of which he has so many, the fact that animals don't behave as men do. Animals aren't exterminating their own kind and the rest of the planet with them. But yet this is what man does in the name of civilization. Is this civilization, and what does that word even mean? Twain so accurately depicts the maniacal behavior of the human race that so many are so blind to, even at this late hour, even with the natural world imploding around us on every side. We still have so much of the population that simply only concerns themselves with the state of the stock market, or perhaps what new car they may get this year or next. We have powers around the globe maneuvering for World War III. We have atrocities occurring in our sky that are unimaginable, absolutely unimaginable. How many people even remember what a blue sky looked like? When we have, at best, silvery white skies, and many other days we have skies that look like something from another planet. We have mountains and mountains of film footage of these aircraft spraying up close, nozzles visible. We have government documents, we have military documents, Senate documents, patents, historical reports. We have news reports for any who care to look at them of species die-off around the globe. And how could this not happen? I mean, let's consider man's arrogance that when he damages Earth's life support systems by human activity, that he has at an even higher level of arrogance the notion that yet more human activity will somehow fix this. Yet more, quote, technology will somehow fix the damage done. But it only does more damage. And why would we be surprised at this? Where do we go from here? What possible remedy can there be for the unimaginably dark horizon that's now before us all? Unless or until a more substantial percentage of the human race chooses to awaken and face the whole unvarnished truth, we will continue on the current course of planetary omnicide. I want to state again that those in the media, those in governmental agencies like the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and the EPA, those in the medical community, those in our military, and in countless other arenas, all those who are willfully participating in the hiding of the truth and the deception of populations, you will bear the burden of responsibility for all that is about to befall the human race and life on earth. And a message also to all those in the population that refuse to investigate or examine the truth. You also will bear the same responsibility. This is the tale of the so-called human race. And its behavior must change, or we have absolutely no chance for long-term survival. None whatsoever. This is a mathematical fact. What will you do today for the greater good? What will you choose to spend your time and energy on? The human race, and indeed all life on earth, is at a crossroad. Now is when we decide why we're here, what we stand for, and what we're willing to do to try to salvage some sort of future for our children. Make every day count. This is Dane Wigington for GeoEngineeringWatch.org. Until next week.
JJ Inc., and when I'm on planet Earth, I listen to UCI.